Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to discuss common efforts to end the conflicts in the region. Hezbollah confirms the death of Hashem Safieddine, a prominent figure and potential successor to Hassan Nasrallah. And with less than 2 weeks to go until Election Day, Donald Trump rallies in Georgia, while Kamala Harris sits down with CNN in Philadelphia. Hello and welcome. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken held talks today in Riyadh, talks in which they discussed the situations in Gaza and Lebanon. Well, this visit comes as Blinken continues his tour of the region following a meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday. Well, Blinken reiterated to his hosts in Israel the need to end the war in Gaza, free the hostages, and allow the people of Gaza to rebuild without Hamas.
Since October 7th, a year ago, Israel has achieved most of its strategic objectives when it comes to Gaza, all with the idea of making sure that October 7th could never happen again. In the space of a year, it's managed to dismantle Hamas's military capacity. It's destroyed much of its arsenal. It's eliminated its senior leadership, including, most recently, Yahya Sinwar. This has come at the cost, great cost, to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Now is the time to turn those successes into an enduring strategic success. And there are really two things left to do. Get the hostages home and bring the war to an end with an understanding of what will follow. And that's what we've been working on this past day and will continue to work on throughout this trip.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking there. Meanwhile, in an exclusive interview with Arabiya News, the senior Hamas official Bassem Naim told my colleague Riz Khan that if Antony Blinken wasn't able to stop the Israeli aggression in Gaza, then he should go back to Washington and focus on the US election instead.
With Antony Blinken making his 11th visit to the region, if you could have a message for him, what would it be?
Either he come here to say, for the Israelis, you have to stop the aggression immediately, or I would advise him to spare the time and to go back to the Washington. Maybe he has better job to help Kamala Harris or his administration to win the next election. He has nothing to do here if it is not to stop the aggression immediately against the Palestinian people.
Hamas official Bassem Naim speaking there. Well, let's cross to Tel Aviv now and get the latest from our correspondent Sarah Coates, who's standing by for us. Sarah, welcome to the programme. Blinken arrived there in Israel with calls for a halt to the fighting in Gaza, for a diplomatic solution to the conflict in Lebanon. He's now left. Has he left empty-handed?
Hello there, Tom. It certainly doesn't feel as though Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, really achieved anything concrete during this visit, especially here in Israel. If you're looking at this push to get a ceasefire in Gaza, to get these 101 Israeli hostages released, and it really doesn't appear as though Mr. Blinken did in any way strong-arm the Israelis to actually get this ceasefire in the Strip, nor any kind of resolution with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, when we're talking about Gaza, we also need to talk about the positions of both Israel and also Hamas, and it really doesn't appear as though there is any willingness from either side, if you look at it like that, to really change these long-held positions on the ground. The Israelis have been saying that they will continue to operate inside Gaza and make sure that Hamas does not pose a threat to Israel anymore. And when you look at Hamas's position, it continues to say that none of these 101 hostages will be released until there is a full comprehensive ceasefire and also a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Strip. So if we're looking at any kind of movement when it comes to a ceasefire and hostage deal, it doesn't appear as though he achieved much. And certainly this is really being looked at by a lot of people here in the region, as we just heard from that interview that you just played that clip from there. Many people asking, well, why did the US Secretary of State make this 11th wartime visit to the region if he wasn't going to try and pressure the Israelis into actually achieving a ceasefire on the ground?
Yeah, one of the things that Blinken did do was to talk about the suffering of civilians in Gaza. Just tell us a bit more about what he said on that regard.
He said that much more needs to be done to get this vital aid into the Gaza Strip. It's also understood that Mr. Blinken did talk to these senior Israeli officials during these meetings that he had throughout the day yesterday, speaking about what is known as the General's Plan. Now, we do need to remember that there is this re-offensive happening, rather, in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. A lot of people there said to be not able to leave this northern part of the Strip. This is something really that's been seen as a way to actually starve people out of particular areas, something that the Israelis are denying doing. But certainly this is something, according to a number of officials here on the ground, that was spoken about. And there is a lot of concern when it comes, of course, to the humanitarian situation on the ground inside Gaza. A lot of these aid groups, Tom, have been saying basically that no aid, no vital supplies have actually been allowed into this northern part of the Strip for more than 2 weeks, which is really ringing the alarm bells, certainly given the already dire situation on the ground in that part of Gaza.
Okay, and Sarah, I wanted to ask you about what Blinken said to the Israeli leadership with regards to Iran, because he said, don't exacerbate the hostilities with Iran. I'm assuming, therefore, he was talking about this anticipated Israeli strike on Iran, I should say counter-attack on Iran.
Certainly, there really is growing concern over what this may look like, and there is a big push from American diplomats to try and dial Israel's response back. But we do need to remember this happened on the 1st of this month. It was an unprecedented attack. It saw about 200 ballistic missiles shot by Iran into Israel, with Israel vowing there will be a powerful response, something that Iran has not seen before. And there is also a bit of concern. We do need to remember that there was this drone attack on Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, on his private residence in Caesarea over the weekend. We saw these pictures coming in of where this drone hit. The censorship has been lifted, and this drone actually hit his bedroom window. And there is concern now that after this attack, which Benjamin Netanyahu is blaming on agents of Iran, that this response by Israel to that unprecedented ballistic missile attack, that this could actually be something that is much stronger. Now, we are hearing, according to a number of sources here in Hebrew media, that this target has been picked. It is still unclear as to when this Israeli retaliation will happen and what it will look like, but it is certainly raising a lot of concern, not just among the Americans, but really among the global community as to when this will happen and what it will look like, that this could actually further increase hostilities in the region, Tom.
And Sarah, just lastly and briefly, if you will, Hezbollah fired multiple rockets and missiles at Israel during the course of the last 2 days. What's been the scale of the damage?
That remains unclear at this hour, but Hezbollah has said over the last half hour or so that it's unleashed what it is calling a swarm of drones on an army base just south of Haifa. That is about 150 kilometres north of where I'm standing now, a vital port city. Now, in terms of other incidents throughout the day, there have been many rockets fired into these largely evacuated northern communities, large fires breaking out in places like Kiryat Shimona. And in a separate incident a little earlier today in Arabiya, there was a man in his 50s that sustained very serious injuries. He was actually hit by shrapnel from an interceptor missile. The condition of this person is unknown. And earlier this morning, for the second consecutive day, There was a barrage of rockets fired at central Israel, including here in Tel Aviv. Those rockets were intercepted in the sky just above me here, and Hezbollah says that these were aimed at a military base not far from where I'm standing, Tom.
OK, Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you very much indeed for that update. Staying with the Middle East, and Hezbollah confirmed today that the group's replacement leader has indeed been killed. Hashem Safieddine, the apparent successor of Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in an airstrike. Well, Israel says he was killed along with other Hezbollah leaders in a strike on the southern suburbs of Beirut. Well, Safieddine had strong ties to Iran and did some of his religious studies there. Well, here's how people on the streets of Beirut reacted to the news of his death. Let's listen to how people reacted in Beirut to the news of Safieddine's death.
Regarding the news circulating about the martyrdom of Hashem Safieddine, there are others. If he really has been martyred, then congratulations to him. If he still hasn't, then congratulations to us for still having him as a leader. And if one commander goes, there are 1,000 other commanders to lead Hezbollah. In any way, the world does not stop at a person, and no party will stop at a person, and no army stops at one leader. When one dies, another takes his place.
Even if they appoint someone else to replace Safieddine, every person they name to appoint, Israel will have him in mind to assassinate, so they can get rid of something called Hezbollah.
Reaction there to the news of Safieddine's death. Well, this comes after the Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut, which took place on the 27th of September. Let's bring you some other of the day's news stories now. An explosion took place in front of the headquarters of the Turkish Aerospace Organization just outside Ankara today. Initial images shown by Turkey's private NTV television channel showed a large cloud of smoke in front of the site's entrance. Well, the Turkish Interior Minister Ali Yerkaya says 4 people were killed. More than a dozen others were injured. Pope Francis met the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin at the Vatican as he attended a mass for the canonization of new saints in St. Peter's Square. The 87-year-old pontiff prayed for peace in Gaza, where he said that Palestinians are suffering inhumane acts. Well, Austin earlier spoke about the situation in Gaza, saying that failure to address the humanitarian situation in the enclave could create more insurgents. In a shocking Brooklyn court case, the former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, Mike Jeffries, has been charged with sex trafficking and prostituting young men. Well, the lawsuit alleges he lured aspiring models from the years 2008 to 2015 with false job offers, only to exploit them during their travels. Well, if convicted, Jeffries could face up to 22 years in prison. The US Vice President Kamala Harris is back on the campaign trail today, holding a televised town hall event in the key battleground state of Pennsylvania. Well, she was criticized by the former US President Donald Trump for being, quote, lazy as hell. This after spending Tuesday conducting interviews in Washington, D.C. Instead, another former president and a rap god took to the stage on her behalf in Michigan, where there is a significant number of Muslim voters. Well, our correspondent Benji Hire filed this report.
This is what a US election looks like 2 weeks out from polling day. The hip-hop hero of Detroit, Eminem, in his home state, spitting verses for the VP.
Detroit! I think Vice President Harris supports a future for this country where these freedoms and many others will be protected and upheld. And here to tell you much more about that, President Barack Obama.
An orator of a different kind, losing himself in the world of rap.
I have done a lot of rallies, so I don't usually get nervous. But I was feeling some kind of way following Eminem. I mean, I notice my palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, vomit on my sweater already, mom's spaghetti. I'm nervous, but on the surface I look calm and ready to drop bombs, but I keep on forgetting.
In North Carolina,
no one trusts her, no one takes her seriously, and something is clearly wrong with her. Something is wrong with her.
Donald Trump launching vicious personal attacks on his rival, calling Kamala Harris a low IQ individual. Trump on Tuesday was on the receiving end of a strong rebuke by his own former Chief of Staff John Kelly. The ex-Marine Corps general said his old boss meets the definition of a fascist, warning he would govern like a dictator. He claimed Trump once demanded the kind of generals that Hitler had. Comments denied by Trump's camp that might have once sunk a candidate's White House hopes. Cue condemnation from the current commander-in-chief, pillaring his predecessor.
We got to lock him up. Politically lock him up. Lock him out. That's what we have to do.
Kamala Harris took a more measured tone as she sells her vision to the country.
Part of what is important in this election is really not only turning the page, but closing the page and the chapter on an era that suggests that Americans are divided.
This election, though, isn't one on sound bites. It's one at the ballot box, and there's already been a record turnout in a number of states.
And I know you've heard it about, 15 times so far today, but it's worth repeating. Here in Wisconsin, early voting starts today. If you haven't voted yet, I won't be offended if you just walk out right now. Go vote.
It's in states like these where the next president will be picked, as both campaigns enter the final push to polling day. Benji Haya, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Well, staying with the US election, let's cross to our chief correspondent, Simon Marks, in Washington. Simon, the two candidates, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, crisscrossing the US today. They're trying to win over undecided voters, aren't they? And I just wondered if you could just bring us up to speed on what exactly they've both been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the name of the game now in the remaining days of this election, to win over any voters that remain undecided and remain up for grabs. So Donald Trump is going to be addressing two events later today in the battleground state of Georgia. Kamala Harris, we did not expect to see until this evening, when she will be participating in a televised town hall on the television network CNN. But a few minutes ago, she did emerge from her residence here in Washington, D.C. To make a statement before reporters, capitalizing on comments that were made within the last few days by Donald Trump's former chief of staff at the White House, General John Kelly, who, as we reported earlier, is indicating that he believes that Donald Trump, if re-elected, has fascist tendencies. He also reveals in an interview with a journalist for The Atlantic magazine that Donald Trump, in General Kelly's presence, on several occasions spoke approvingly of Adolf Hitler. Now, Kamala Harris has seized on those comments, making this appearance in Washington and describing Donald Trump as increasingly unhinged and unstable. And she says in a second term, people like General John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions. it is worth making the point that General Kelly served fully for 2 years as Donald Trump's chief of staff. He has lodged a critique on many occasions of Donald Trump's time in office before. He has never previously revealed his view that Donald Trump has fascist tendencies, and critics of General Kelly within Donald Trump's inner circle will say that this is a man who was loyal to Donald Trump at the White House while he was observing these behaviours that he now claims to have witnessed. But there's no question that Kamala Harris views this development as very welcome for her and an opportunity, she thinks, to try and drive a stake between Donald Trump and any floating voters out there that are still flirting with the possibility of backing the former president.
Yeah, and just tell us a bit about the voting process, because early voting is, of course, well underway. Today we've seen the vice presidential hopeful for the Democratic Party, Governor Tim Walz, casting his ballot in Minnesota. Just tell us, what's the level of enthusiasm and participation that we're seeing in the early stages of voting?
Yeah, it's a very interesting issue. And of course, it puts paid to the whole concept of election day. I mean, November the 5th is basically now the day on which this election will simply wrap up. It has been underway in many states, in some states for several weeks now. As of this morning, more than 25.2 million Americans have already cast their ballots in this election in the key battleground states of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Almost 6.5 million ballots have been cast. Nationally, you're looking at around 20% of the electorate having already cast their ballots. That is lower than the number of people who in 2020 had used early voting as of this moment. And that's why you're seeing Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, the surrogates campaigning for him, hammering away at this idea of getting people out to the polls early for two reasons. One, because it guarantees they voted and they don't have to worry about ginning them up as we get closer to quote unquote election day, but also because it will give them a sense through exit polling and the monitoring of other data, whether these voters that are showing up at the polls early are registered Democrats or Republicans. It will give the parties a sense of how much work they've still got left to do in the days remaining of this campaign to get the vote out.
And Simon, just lastly, all the opinion polls suggest the economy is the most important thing on voters' minds. So just tell us, what sort of indicators are we getting about the health of the world's #1 economy?
Well, I mean, they're extraordinarily strong. I mean, this week alone, the International Monetary Fund has said that the United States economy continues to lead the world, pulling ahead of the world's other advanced economies in very large measure due to higher productivity. Treasury bond yields have been spiking here in light of fresh economic data that's been reported within the past few weeks relating to output and also relating to the number of new jobs that have been created. And of course, both the Dow Jones and the S&P have notched up record gains, recording record highs over the course of the last few days. So traditionally, you would think that's all very, very good news for Kamala Harris as she continues to wage her campaign to succeed Joe Biden. And yet, polling continues to show that millions of Americans say they are simply not feeling it in their own personal pockets, and that what really worries them more than anything else is the price that they are paying for groceries and other essentials and inflation. And that's why there is still a gap between the strength and health of the American economy and voters who say not only that they feel that the country's on the wrong economic track, but many of whom blame the Biden-Harris administration for the country finding itself in the predicament that they, in their daily lives, face.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Simon Marks, our chief correspondent in Washington. Thanks a lot. Now to a transatlantic row about the US election. And the governing UK Labour Party is denying any wrongdoing after Donald Trump's campaign team made a formal complaint to the Federal Election Commission. All this over claims of foreign interference by the Labour Party. Our correspondent in London, Ollie Barrett, filed this report.
The initial social media post from Labour's head of operations that sparked the complaint from the Trump campaign has now been taken down. But in it, the Labour head of operations suggested that dozens of Labour figures are going to be campaigning for the Democrats in the US election campaign. And it made a call for further Labour figures to be involved in the campaign in the United States, and said that their housing could be sorted in some way. Now, it's not illegal for foreign volunteers to campaign on behalf of either of the major political parties in the United States, but it would be illegal if foreigners were being compensated in some way. Now, the Labour Party here in the UK insists that nothing has been going on in terms of any wrongdoing. It says that any Labour figures who are going to be campaigning in the United States for the Democrats, for Kamala Harris, are doing so as volunteers, are doing so on their own time, and the Labour Party insists that it has not been playing any role in organising or funding these trips. We've also been hearing from Downing Street today, which insists that whoever wins the US election in November, that Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, and his administration will work closely with the next president, whoever it is going to be. Keir Starmer himself, the UK Prime Minister, insists that his relationship with Donald Trump can remain good despite this episode, despite this row. Keir Starmer has been investing significant political capital in trying to reach out to President Donald Trump to try and establish a good relationship with the man who could be the next US president, who could be returning to the White House after November's election. In fact, in September, when Keir Starmer was visiting the United States, he didn't meet with Kamala Harris because he said at the time that their diaries didn't work out to fix a meeting. He did visit with Donald Trump at Trump Tower in New York and said that they had had good discussions when doing so. So a difficult episode for the UK Prime Minister. He is trying to play down this row, play down this episode, but he and people around him in number 10 Downing Street here in London will be aware that there is the potential for this complaint by the Trump campaign to continue to lead to difficult questions for it, particularly if the result in November is close. Ollie Barrett, Al Arabiya News, London.
OK, well, let's get more on this now with Sebastian Gorka, former strategist to President Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Now, you've been quoted as describing this support by the Labour Party as being outrageous. Elon Musk has been calling it illegal election interference. But let's be clear, according to US Federal Election Commission laws, and we heard it there from our correspondent, foreign volunteers are allowed on US campaigns, aren't they, as long as they're not paid. So just to be clear, no one's broken any laws here, have they?
How do you know that? Do you know whether they're being paid or not? Do you know who's paying for their hotel rooms? Do you know who's paying for their travel? Either these are in-kind contributions which must be declared, or they're felons and they're committing crimes. There are several foreign nationals, many of them communist Chinese ties, in prison today for doing these kinds of things. One of them was arrested by the FBI just in May for misappropriating, using campaign funds from foreign sources here in the US. So I'm surprised you know so much about what Labour is doing and who's funding them, but I don't. And if monies are spent from foreign sources for Kamala Harris's cratering campaign, that is a crime in the United States.
I'm sure it is. And if that evidence does come to light, I'm sure you and others will present it to the relevant authorities. Let's talk about Sophia Patel, who is the Labour Party's head of operations. She put this call to mobilise out on LinkedIn, and her party says she acted out of her own initiative and that she doesn't represent the party. How has that explanation gone down, do you think?
Farcical. It's a joke. It's like a fart in a submarine. Are you serious? You're the head of operations and you're going on a professional platform, the biggest in the world, called LinkedIn, and you're saying, hi, why we've got 100 people we want to send from the UK to 4 battleground states in the US. It's a lie. Of course it's a lie. And the fact that she's still got her job tells you something is wrong in the state of Denmark.
It's fair to say, isn't it, that the Trump campaign has had some support from some sympathetic British politicians in the past. I'm talking about Nigel Farage, the former Prime Minister, well, the short-lived British Prime Minister Liz Truss. How is this different?
Well, very clearly, individuals coming here and appearing, giving a speech for free is incomparable to this. I mean, let's do a little bit of whataboutism, which the elite so thinks is a problem. What if President Trump, whilst in office, had sent 100 members of his America First team to the UK to work for the Tories or for Nigel Farage? Could you imagine what Auntie B, could you imagine what the Oxbridge set in Downing Street, Keir Starmer et al. Would have said? There would have been absolute riots, pulling out of hair, screaming on BBC4. We know what would have happened. The absolute hypocrisy is without limit. But they think they can do it because what? Because Kamal is desperate? We know what's happening here. The people who are hated because they are quote-unquote members of the elite think they get to do whatever they like.
It's going to put the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, in a rather tricky position, isn't it, potentially, in about 2 weeks' time, if Donald Trump wins, and I'm sure you think he will win. Do you think it's going to really test the special relationship between the United Kingdom and Washington?
Well, look at what we've had to date. The imbecilic Lammy has yet to apologize for calling my former boss, the current leader of the opposition, the man who may, God willing, win in 13 days, a neo-Nazi psychopath. I mean, that's the man who's supposed to represent the foreign affairs portfolio for the UK, with which we're supposed to have a special relationship. And he thinks he gets to call the potential future commander-in-chief a neo-Nazi sociopath. I mean, what has the Labour Party become? I mean, I grew up under Maggie Thatcher, but no one, and the Kinnock would never have done this. None of even Michael Foot's team would have ever done this. This is unconscionable. It looks as if they wish to sabotage the great relationship between London and Washington, and also undermine the president's very warm feelings for the UK. So Labour seems to have completely lost the plot, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump administration, well, Donald Trump in his first term in office never had to work, did he, with a Labour prime minister? This is going to be his first chance. But in the past, it's worked quite well, hasn't it? Didn't Tony Blair get on reasonably well with George W. Bush? It is possible, isn't it, for there to be a good working relationship?
But George W. Bush, but George W. Bush represents the establishment. I mean, the defunct, extinct rhino establishment, the Republicans in name only. This is very, very different. I mean, look, this is the recrudescence of representative government, which is called pejoratively by the left populism, which is weird because when you're very popular, then that should be the whole point, shouldn't it? So you look at what Brexit represents, what Nigel represents, President Trump, Modi, Maloney. This is the rebirth of representative politics across the planet. So please don't compare America First, Donald Trump, or any of us to the Bush old school, club network of the old school Republican Party. This is a different age. But to think that a man received with all the pomp and circumstance with which the late great Queen Elizabeth received President Trump, that man has to put up with the likes of Lammy and Starmer trying to sabotage him, makes you think twice about what the modern Labour Party has become.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Really appreciate it. Sebastian Gorka, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's get some business news for you now. The Saudi economy is forecast to expand 4.4% in 2025. That's the fastest in 3 years and up from an expected 1.3% earlier in the year. Well, according to a Reuters poll of economists, the growth in Saudi Arabia is fueled by higher oil output. Well, the Gulf Cooperation's Council economies are forecast to expand an average of 4.1% next year. That is up from an earlier estimate of 3.7% back in July. The CEO of Boeing, Kelly Ortberg, is warning that the company is at a crossroads. This after losses reached around $6 billion. Well, since his August appointment, Ortberg has been focused on stabilizing the firm amidst manufacturing and safety issues. While more than 30,000 workers remain on strike at Boeing, halting production for more than a month now, as they prepare to vote on a new pay and benefits proposal. Before we go, some sports news for you. The NBA legend LeBron James and his son Bronny today made history as the league's first father-son duo to play together. Well, not only are they the first to compete in the NBA at the same time, but they also played on the same team. Well, that dynamic duo appeared at the court during the Los Angeles Lakers season opener, prompting a huge ovation from the crowd. And the former Los Angeles Dodgers star Fernando Valenzuela has died. A beloved figure in baseball, Mexican-born Valenzuela pitched 17 seasons in MLB, most notably with the Dodgers, where he helped lead the 1981 team to victory over the New York Yankees in the World Series. Well, his remarkable performances sparked Fernando Mania, drawing a significant Mexican fan base for the team. He was 63 years old. Just before we go, a reminder of our top stories. The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman meets the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to discuss the common efforts to end conflicts in the region. Hezbollah confirms the death of Hashem Safieddine, a prominent figure and potential successor to Hassan Nasrallah. And with less than 2 weeks to go until Election Day, Donald Trump rallies in Georgia while Kamala Harris sits down with CNN in Philadelphia. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Riz Khan at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time to join Rosanna Lockwood for Global News Today. That is a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.